I have a story with which I'm going to conclude about an act of robot soft exorcism that occurred in 1960 in downtown Nashville. James Lawson, as you may know, came to Nashville after being counseled by Martin Luther King Jr. to move to Nashville to enroll at Vanderbilt Divinity and to see about being part of the integrating of the lunch counters in up till then segregated lunch counters in Nashville. You had the whites only section in a restaurant, and you had the area for the language of the time was for colored people, in the same way that you had water fountains for colored people. James Lawson, a student remotely of Gandhi, of Howard Thurman, of any number of folks, trained American Baptist Bible College students, John Lewis among them, Fisk students, other students in Nashville, in the work of nonviolently sitting in the whites only section, demanding service, and then waiting for law enforcement to come and drag them out of the restaurant and then wait for arrest. In order to do this well, you had to be trained in role-playing beforehand. And if you didn't believe that you had it in you to not lash out or hit back or say something that might incite violence to the people who are calling you any number of words, your job was to not try that day, because you could wreck the whole thing. Similarly, in Nashville right now, and in Ferguson years ago, in all of these instances, you can have 1,000 nonviolent protesters, and if one person joins that crowd and throws a brick through a window, it is suddenly a riot, according to media sources. And it does give governors and mayors and whomever coverage to crack down violently on a nonviolent demonstration. So the story, still headed to the exchange. James Lawson was there in 1960 to remind the students of their commitment to the teachings of Jesus specifically, and to tell the gathering white citizens of Nashville who were trying to rough them up, these students are committed to nonviolence. You might strike them, but they will not strike back, and you can deal with yourself on whether or not that's a courageous or heroic thing to punch someone who is honor-bound to not hit back. So Lawson was there to mediate, and out of this, a man with a leather jacket pushed his way to the front of the crowd and spat in James Lawson's face and called him the N-word. James Lawson looked at the man and said, as the spit was rolling down his face, and said, "Do you have a handkerchief?" The man, caught off guard, produced a handkerchief from his pocket and handed it to James Lawson. And as James Lawson was wiping the spit off of his face, he noticed the guy had a leather jacket on, sort of James Dean motorcycle-y kind of thing. He saw a motorcycle behind the man and said, "Is that your motorcycle?" To which the man said, "Yes, it is." And James Lawson said, "What's the horsepower on that motorcycle?" And within a few seconds, James Lawson and the aggressor are talking about motorcycles. And within a few more seconds, the man who had spat in James Lawson's face looked around and said, "Is there any way I can help you folks with what you're doing?" It was a complete disarming, an exorcism, I want to say, that occurred in that moment. And a man who knows what his narrative was at that point in time, but within seconds he was interested in changing his narrative. And of course, as we know, repentance is metanoia, is turning your mind around. I of course want to note that there are others who tried that kind of thing, and it did not work. But it did work in this one moment, in which James Lawson was prepared to say something like that. I took a nonviolence class at Vanderbilt with Reverend Lawson, and I was able to ask him, how do you become someone to whom it would occur to respond that way to an angry, violent person? And he said, well, you have to keep in your mind an imagery of infinite possibility. I was so glad I was there to hear those words, because I honestly feel that it was a little like being on hand to write words down when any prophet or when Jesus himself drops on us a lyrical, eloquent aphorism with which to survive a toxic, violent terror age. So I will leave you with that. You have to keep in your mind an imagery of infinite possibility, and I give that to you as an oracle of beloved community.